Good morning, homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. Welcome back to Miles Away Farm. We are doing the second half of the July garden tour, and it's a couple of days later. I believe it's July 8th, and it is about 6:45 in the morning, and we are in a massive heat wave along with most of the country. We're going to be over 100 degrees for an entire week with the exception of Wednesday, which is 98. So this is when having good soil and good water retention in your soil really makes all the difference. So let's see what's going on in this hot July garden. These rows are 100 feet long. I'm gardening in southeast Washington, where it's dry and hot in the summertime. This is not the rainy Washington that most people are familiar with. And the middle section of this garden is planted out with vegetables and flowers. The side sections are fallowed this year, with the exception of one row of sorghum. So let's start. Good morning, Charlie. Let's start down here just because there's one Rudbeckia from last year that survived over the winter that I want to show you guys. Look at this gorgeous Rudbeckia, and pretty decent drought tolerance because this is not getting any water at all. And it is blooming gloriously. This is Sahara, I believe, Rudbeckia. But very, very pretty. And everything else in here is the last of all of our poppies that were so beautiful last month. Go and watch the beginning of my last month's video to see all of these poppies blooming, and now they're drying out. If I turn these over and tap them in my hand, they are dropping seed. So this is how you perpetuate poppies. Wanted to show you guys the Marionberry row. Marionberries are a type of blackberry, and I'm going to take these plants out ultimately, but I decided to leave what was in here in until I got this crop because I've got a lot of fruit in here. The problem is this heat is going to be very, very hard on these berries. I've harvested a handful out here, but I'm already getting a lot of this where they're small and kind of dried and the birds are getting into them. So a lot of potential out here, but I'm not sure how much of it is actually going to come to fruition because the timing on this heat is not great. But that's the Marionberries. All right, homesteaders, we're going to try this again because I filmed all of this garden tour on Monday morning and it turned out my camera overheated and shut off. And when it does that, it doesn't save any of the footage that it's shot. So I lost everything that I had done. And then it was too hot and too bright to film anything after that until Tuesday night. So it is now Tuesday night, and we are here to finish up and mostly redo our garden tour. So we are in the middle of a heat wave, as is a very large portion of the country. I think we had a high today of 109. It is currently about 95, and I'm going to film this in sections and piece them together so that if my camera overheats again, I don't lose everything. This section is mostly fallow. There's some volunteer sunflowers in there. And then I have Jerusalem artichoke in the middle, also called sunchokes. They are a perennial sunflower. This is Jerusalem artichoke that's wilted. This is probably gopher that's gotten in there and eaten the roots, which is probably why it looks like that, because these guys are fine. And so this isn't getting a lot of water. It is getting some water, but these don't usually wilt. So I'm guessing there's a gopher climbing around in there. And then here's the rhubarb, which is done for the season. I could continue to harvest this, but it tends to get kind of spongy and pithy this time of year. And so generally rhubarb is a spring crop. This is probably some slug damage out here. Who knows? Lots of bugs. It's summer. So turning around, this is the melon row. So I have melons in here every 5 feet. And I've got a whole variety of different kinds. Put together a seed swap this year. I do one every year. And there were a bunch of melon varieties that I wasn't familiar with. And so I decided to try all of them from the seed that was left over from the seed swap. And so I've got a bunch of different kinds in here. This one I grow every year. And we have a little baby melon. So that's exciting. And this particular variety, this is Arava. It's an Israeli green cantaloupe. And it does well for me every year. This is not the first time I've grown it. There's another couple of little baby melons coming in there, so that's exciting. What's been most interesting about this melon experiment is what has done well and what has not, because a lot of these are just not happy. And so this variety, Batik Samara, definitely not happy. One of the plants in here died. This one is on its way out, so that's also dying. This one is the same kind. I have 2 of each. This one is doing better. That could be gopher. I'm not sure what's happening there, but this one, much, much smaller than the other one that we just looked at. And then we're moving to different kinds as we go along here, 2 by 2. They are starting to vine, so we're starting to get some vining. And generally this time of year, I will direct the vines back into the rows. And then eventually I give up and it gets to the point where I can't mow in here anymore because they just sprawl everywhere. But right now, I'm still directing things into the rows. We are getting some flowering, which is good to see. So yeah, hopefully we'll have a good crop of melons. This is Nicotina, which is I believe it's the same genus, different species as tobacco. It blooms in the early morning and in the evening, and it smells really wonderful. So kind of jasmine-like. And so people will sometimes plant it in what they call night blooming gardens. It has tiny little seeds. I've grown it for years, and this was just a volunteer that came up here left over from last year. And so I've just left it. This melon is getting a little bit shaded because of it, but it doesn't seem too worse for wear. I meant to dig it up and move it, and then I didn't. And let's see if I can zoom in and you guys can see this. There are a million teeny tiny little insects, probably thrips, all over these flowers. Which brings me to a point, which is go out and look at your garden in the late afternoon or at dusk. You will find so many pests that you don't realize are around during the day. So there's a lot of stuff that only comes out in the evening or at night. We went out and were looking at the garden the other night. I was looking at some dahlias that I have planted, and the dahlias I knew were not doing well. The flowers looked really eaten, and I wasn't sure what was going on. And we went out in the evening and they were just completely covered with earwigs. And so the earwigs were doing a lot of damage, and I wasn't seeing them during the day. Look at this guy. This one is really spreading. So he's very happy. Sprawling all over the place, lots of blossoms. So that's exciting. This one's doing well. Maybe it will climb up this volunteer sunflower as it grows. Pretty fun. But that's the melon row, and then the rest of this row, I originally had some soybeans in here and none of them germinated. And so I had a lot of extra basil, so I just tucked basil in all over the garden this year. And I've just trimmed this up today and made a large batch of pesto. Basil is one of those things that goes to flower really quickly, and you need to keep it trimmed. When it flowers, it changes the flavor, and so if you want to do things with it or dry it, you need to pick it frequently, because once it starts to flower, it just keeps trying over and over and over again. So that's basil. This is a little echinacea that I grew from seed. I have a beautiful big 3-year-old plant of this in my front yard next to my front door that I'll put a little video over this. So hopefully I might have to dig this up because it's not really a good spot for a perennial plant, but love echinacea. And then a few more of our rudbeckias. I also have rudbeckia tucked in all over the garden. Look how gorgeous that one is, my goodness. A volunteer feverfew that I transplanted into this row after running it over with the mower because it was in the wrong spot, but it's coming back and doing well. And then this is our tobacco, and this is actually leaf tobacco or smoking tobacco. I'm not a smoker. I don't intend to become a smoker, but I got these seeds at the seed swap, and I thought it would be fun to see what the plants actually look like. And not surprisingly, they are enjoying this heat, and so they are growing very quickly. And so that's just going to be fun to see what those plants look like. And then tucked down on the very end was one extra tomato that I hadn't sold and hadn't given away. And so I just threw it in at the end of this row. This is a Cherokee Purple. And it was a little bit stunted from being in a pot as long as it was, but it's recovering. She's starting to come back. This is the corn row, which, you know, I didn't get really great germination in here, so it's a little bit spotty, but I've been coming in here and hand weeding out the big annual lamb's quarter and pigweed, and the corn is looking great. And they say you want your corn to be knee-high by the 4th of July. I think we just barely made it. At this point, it's taller than my knees, so the corn is starting to look quite good. We have a whole row of that going all the way down at the end. This is the kind of stuff I'm weeding out. That's a pigweed. Red root pigweed, so named for that red root. Edible amaranth. At the end of this next row, we have coriander, aka cilantro. This was cilantro last year, and I never got around to harvesting it when it went to seed. And so it reseeded itself. Cilantro is a cool season crop. It really loves the cool of the spring. It's very hard to get cilantro to be ripe at the same time when you actually want it in August when your tomatoes are ripe because of that. But this is what it looks like when it goes to seed. And so it flowers. The pollinators love it. And then coriander is simply cilantro seed that's been ground. And it has a very lemony, spicy, lovely flavor to it. And it's common in chili powder, along with a lot of other things. And so I use it in quite a few of my spice mixes. So at this point, this is almost entirely done blooming. We still have a few blooms out here and there. And with this heat that we're getting, these are going to mature very quickly, and I'll come through and harvest a lot of this seed. It's not quite ready. You want to harvest it like this. Nah, this still isn't ready. It should look dry, and at this point, it's still got a little bit of moisture and greenness to it. So we're not quite ready. Another couple weeks and that'll be ready to come out. This is what that whole road looked like in the June garden tour. Another little Rudbeckia tucked in here. Most of these are Rudbeckia Sahara, and so there are a whole bunch of different variations of this kind of tawny, sandy color. They're really just gorgeous, and they're just starting to pop. The whole rest of this row is supposed to all be beans. And I planted some of these beans twice. This particular section that I'm in, I planted twice. You can see how much bigger this plant is from these guys next to it. That's because this came up the first round of planting. This came up the second round of planting. I really had terrible germination on some of this the first time. And then this did pretty good the second round. It's looking all right. And then this section, just nothing. Nothing the first go around, nothing the second go around. The seed was old. I've had bean seed germinate when it's been quite old, so I don't know why I got nothing, because usually it'll survive for quite a while, but nothing in this section. And I haven't replanted anything in here, so I'm not sure what I'm going to do with this little bit. I've got flowers marking the changes in variety here. So this is another zinnia, which of course we just love. And then this was a second planting. And this looks pretty good. Mostly this came up the second time around. We did okay. And then this section down here, absolutely nothing came up. This was Whipple Creek. And I actually have some of these soaking, and I'm just doing an indoor germination test on a paper towel just to see if I can get them to germinate, because I'm so surprised. They weren't that old. But this was more tobacco. I happen to have more tobacco. And so I just went ahead and threw them in here because I couldn't get the beans to come up. So, you know, it's always good to have backup. Another zinnia, gorgeous. This is a blend. These are zinnias were, I'll put the name up on the screen, I can't remember, but it's a mix of different colors that are all kind of in this orangey. I am in love with peach colored zinnias, and that's what I really wanted, and I don't think I got a single one out of that batch, even though the color on the Seed Company catalog showed some peach colored ones in there. And then this is our Tepiary, and they're doing just fine. I didn't get really solid germination. I've got a lot of gaps in here, but the ones that did come up came up just fine. And so right now I'm just fighting back the bindweed in order to get this to come up. And then I have yet another Rudbeckia down on the end there. Next row, this is mostly herbs. And so again, a whole bunch more basil that all got haircuts today. Lovely little Signet Marigold. These are often called little gem varieties. It's a different species of marigold, and these are edible. And I have quite a few of them tucked all over the farm this year. So just lovely little yellow Cheerie. This is the last of some dill. And here's a reminder, if you are making pickles and you're looking for dill when your cucumbers start coming in, which is about now, usually, you don't have to make dill pickles with the heads of dill like this, with seeds on them or with flowers on them. You can actually just use dill seed. And so I grow dill every year and just let some of this mature. I collect the seed. And then if you put about 1 teaspoon to 2 teaspoons of dill seed in the bottom of your dill pickles in a quart or a pint jar, you're going to have really nice dill flavor, and you don't necessarily have to have actual dill heads. And so most people think when you make dill pickles that you have to have a head of dill, and you don't. You can just use dill seed. So if your timing on dill is weird, because dill is another cool season crop that will come up in March, and it may not be ready right when you want it for your pickles, just save the seed, and then you're golden. Here's another really gorgeous little zinnia. Boy, that one is just stunning. Look at that. Yay. And then most of the rest of this is herbs and onions. And so this is Za'atar, which I also just harvested today. Za'atar is a wild oregano. It's used in traditional Za'atar mix, and it looks a lot like marjoram, but the leaves are fuzzier. The plant is a little bit squatter, and it's a tender perennial. So sometimes this will overwinter for me, but not always. Not nearly as prolific growing as a marjoram is, but really lovely. Kind of a cross between oregano and thyme is sort of what it tastes like. Here's another Signet Marigold. This is parsley through here, and this one is looking very sad, and I'm assuming this is probably gopher damage that's happening on the roots. I'm not 100% sure, but I've got 4 or 5 plants of parsley in here, and I did harvest a little bit of this today. This is a little bit chewed on. I'm assuming mostly slugs and earwigs. It'll recover most likely and look better a little bit later in the year. But flat leaf Italian parsley, I think it has a much better flavor than the curly parsley, and it'll be really bushy by another month or so. Another Signet Marigold. I told you I had a lot of those. And then this is marjoram, and so compare this to the Za'atar that we just looked at. I also just trimmed this back, but much more upright, much more likely to go to seed quickly. And so this is what going to seed looks like with marjoram. Marjoram, by the way, is like, it's a cousin to oregano, but much more floral. And so very nice in a Italian spice blend, but no fuzz on the leaves on this, just soft, flat leaves, no fuzziness to them. So different for sure. This little guy is called a hummingbird mint, and I have a few of those tucked around the farm. Not as exciting of a flower as I was hoping for. They're a little squat, but pretty. And then we have a whole bunch of snapdragons in here. These are Potomac varieties. I think I have a berry blend and a morning sunrise blend. Ooh, look at the gorgeous, gorgeous peach on that. I am just a huge sucker for all peach colored snapdragons. Peaches and oranges are my favorites with those. But these guys are really tall. This is a cutting snapdragon. a cutting flower. And so these get really tall. I have a very makeshift trellis in here to hold everything up. Hello, my lovely. And then the rest of these snapdragons are called Cherry Twist. And if you watched my other garden tour, I think I showed you that in that. I can't remember for sure. But this is more of a bedding type of snapdragon. There are different categories of snapdragons. They can take different amounts of heat. They bloom at different times of year. Some of them are really early. Some of them are late. But I saw the picture of this and I couldn't resist buying it. And it does not disappoint. I really, really love this, even though it's a short little plant. What a pretty, pretty, pretty snapdragon. And, you know, we can always make it talk, which I used to always do when I was a little girl in my grandmother's garden. But Cherry Twist. And then the rest of this is all more of that Sahara Rudbeckia. Just stunning. And so these are all, even though the color variation that you're seeing here and the slight style variation, that's meant to be that way. So we've got, you know, red. We've got this gorgeous sunset color. This one almost looks like a zinnia. More sunset. This one has quite a bit more yellow. So yeah, these are just starting to come on and so, so pretty. And then the rest of this row is onion. Ha ha ha. See how this is fallen over compared to its neighbors? I suspect that that's getting eaten from underneath by a gopher. We'll see. Maybe not a goner just yet. But I have 3 different kinds of onions in here. My onions look fantastic right now. So they've done well this year. It's a good onion year for whatever reason. And so this first section is storage onions. And then I had a few that for whatever reason didn't survive. And I had some extra celery. And so I tucked celery plants into the missing holes just because I needed some place to put them. You know, that is my favorite part of gardening. They call it planning and then letting go. And so you plan out where you want everything. And then there's always a bit of chaos as you figure things out. Onions are day length specific. And they're also latitude specific. So if you're planting onions, you really need to figure out what the right variety of onion is for your particular latitude. I'm quite a bit far north. And so I grow long day onions. And long day onions are triggered to start actually forming bulbs when the days start getting shorter. We've just come past the summer solstice, which is June 21st. And so after June 21st, these guys stop growing their leaves and start growing their bulbs. And they say that the more leaves you have, the bigger the bulb is going to be, because every leaf is a layer on that bulb. And so right here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So that's going to be a big mama jama. Not all of these are quite that robust. Some of these, like the one right behind it, this guy over here, you know, we're probably only talking 6 or 7. So not all of these will be huge, but we live in great onion climate here. We are known for our Walla Walla sweet onions. And so these are not Walla Wallas. This is a yellow storage onion, but we do really well for onions in this climate. Here's some more of our hummingbird mint. A couple of different plants here. And then moving into, these are red onions. Red storage onions. And this is a variety that has done well for me in storage. Red onions never store as long for me as yellow onions do. A couple more snapdragons to just mark our transition here. And then these are Cipollinis, which is an Italian heirloom variety. And I'm growing these specifically for a customer who is a huge, huge fan of these onions. And she contacts me about 4 times a year, starting in about March, asking me if I'm going to grow them again. And I didn't grow a lot this year. I'm scaled way back from what I normally do. But I told her, hey, whatever I get, they're yours. So those are for her this year. All right, next row over is potatoes, along with another Signet Marigold, because they got tucked in everywhere. I had a few potatoes here and there that didn't germinate from the ones that I had saved from the previous year. And so I've just kind of tucked other things in around them. And these are marked, again, the different varieties are marked by a changing of the guard by using a flower to mark between the varieties. I've been lucky. I hesitate to even say this out loud, but we don't have a huge problem with potato beetles. And I've been in environments where potato beetles were bad, and I know we have potato beetles in our area, but mostly I've been lucky and I haven't had a lot of issues. The damage that I'm seeing on here is probably from something else. I've got a lot of mulch in here. This could be earwigs. It could be slugs, which are ongoing and never ending. But generally I find that they do fine long enough that I get a good crop, even with the minor damage to the leaves. If you ever studied integrated pest management, one of the rules of integrated pest management is how much damage can you tolerate? And I can tolerate quite a bit. In between, we have more zinnias. This is Queen Lime Red, which I just adore. And see, you can see how much more eaten and short these guys are compared to these guys. I don't know what that's about, but different variety of potato, not as tasty to whatever out here is eating them. Potatoes generally are ready to dig. I'll double check this, but and I'll put a difference on the screen if I'm wrong. But approximately 3 weeks, I want to say, after they bloom is about when you can actually start digging them. I often leave mine in the ground longer than that, because the longer they're generally the more mature they are and the better they store, and I'm definitely in it for the storage. However, potatoes are a cool season crop. And so this spate of like an entire week of 100-degree weather, 100 plus, we hit 109. This is not going to be good for these plants. These are going to start looking really terrible. They're going to be miserable. And we might end up digging them sooner than we would have otherwise, simply because they're going to be very unhappy with all of this heat. Yeah, potatoes are a cool season crop, which is not something I understood until about 2 years ago. I saw a great video by the guy who does the Lazy Dog Farm YouTube stuff. His name's Travis. And he did an interview with a potato farmer who sells seed potatoes and just clarified and dispelled a lot of myths around potato growing. It was very, very helpful. And I have a whole blog post on growing potatoes that came out of watching that. We have a beautiful volunteer sunflower here in the middle of all of this. Lovely, lovely. But yeah, potatoes. And then down here at the end, this variety, which was Kanuka Gold, just did not germinate well. And so I only have a few of them in here. And so tucked in, once again, I have more Rudbeckia because I had a ton of Rudbeckia germinate this year. And so it got tucked in all over the place. This lovely marigold, I've been saving seed from this for a couple of years. It started out, it's supposed to look like this. It's called Jolly Jester. But I'm getting some different variation in there from saving seed, and so now it's becoming more red, which I am here for. It's gorgeous. So pretty happy with that. It's good using flowers to divide varieties on something that's going to get tall like a potato. It's nice to put something in here that's going to get tall, otherwise it tends to kind of get swamped out. A little more herbs on the end here. This is an Italian oregano, different from Greek oregano, a little bit more floral, definitely stronger. Tender perennial, often does not overwinter. I keep one in a pot and I overwinter it. I've actually kept the same plant going for about 5 years by bringing a plot into the house in the wintertime and then dividing it in the spring, and I just keep it going. But Italian oregano, very nice, again, for mixed spice mixes. We have thyme here, a couple of thyme plants. And thyme you can often root from cuttings, and so these are rooted from a cutting from last year. And then underneath this cover, just trying to give it a tiny bit of protection from the sun, I have some extra kale and then some extra cabbage. And surprisingly, I expected these cabbage to just conk out because they've been in pots way too long, and I knew they were going to be stunted because of that, but they're actually doing okay. And considering how late it is and how freaking hot it is, I'm amazed that they're doing what they're doing. So we're just going to let them go until it's ready to harvest, or until the heads start to split, whichever comes first. I'm not expecting them to last a really long time because it's way past their bedtime in terms of season for sure. More Rudbeckia, because the Rudbeckia just keeps giving this year. Enjoy this beautiful flower and this beautiful flower. And then tucked in wild here, let me show you this. I actually knocked this plant over today because it was growing the wrong direction. But this is Queen Anne's lace. And Queen Anne's lace is a wild carrot. It's the original wild progenitor of all carrot varieties, is my understanding. And it grows wild and reseeds. It's kind of weedy. It's all over California. But it's a beautiful little flower. The pollinators love it. It doesn't hurt anything. Theoretically, it's even edible. So I just leave it mostly and pull it out when it's inconvenient. But what I wanted to show you here is, see that little spot right there? That's actually a tiny little red flower. And the old story, I'd have to look it up to get the details, but it was something about a spinner spinning yarn and pricking her finger when she was making the lace. And so that's the little tiny drop of blood on the Queen Anne's lace. So kind of a fun thing. And it's like every one of them has that little red dot in the middle. So it's just fun. I don't really know what the actual evolutionary point of that is, but I'll take it. It's gorgeous. And then lastly, this is a little bit more herb here on the end, and then our tomatoes and peppers. And so we have a sage, culinary sage, down here on the end, and she was blooming like crazy and then going to seed. And so I pruned off all the flowers, and now like these are gonna die off, and we're starting to get new growth down here in the middle, which is actually what I was encouraging. I wanted some new tender growth that I could harvest later. There's a volunteer borage. You saw all the borage in my raised bed garden. There's a little bit of it out here as well. I have rosemary. These 3 plants were started from cuttings that I managed to overwinter amazingly, and then threw them out here. And I've trimmed them back once, and at this point they're just starting to get established, and so they haven't done a whole lot of growth just yet. It's a little hot. There's another one of our beautiful nicotinas that volunteered in here. And then this was the big rosemary that I kept in a pot. And so I overwinter one rosemary every year, just like I overwinter the Italian oregano, and bring it in the house, because often our rosemaries will not survive the winter here. We're just a tiny bit too cold. More basil, because basil was everywhere. I think I have it in 5 or 6 different places on the farm this year. And then peppers. These are poblanos. I have decided that my favorite eating pepper for roasting or just chopping and putting into things is the poblano, even over the Joe Parker Anaheim varieties that are hatch style that I've grown for years. I really, really love these peppers. And so I'm just growing peppers for my own use this year. I'm not growing them for production use or production purposes. And so I have 6 poblanos in here. This is sunburn. So people see this all the time. They think it might be blossom end rot or other problems. It's sunburn. You can see, you know, how much, we've got 2 big peppers on this plant. And look at how few actual leaves we have. And so this plant is not doing a very good job of shading its progeny. And they get bushier as the season goes on, but that's just sunburn. You know, if it's left long enough on the plant, you'll start to get some rot. But generally, I just pick them and cut it out and use the rest, and it's fine. Couple of other varieties in here. This is Hungarian Black, which you saw one of these in the other tour of my raised bed garden. This is similar to a jalapeno, not quite as hot. It turns red when it's ripe. And the fact that this itty bitty tiny one is turning red is an indication that this plant is a little bit stressed out, because it should be getting bigger before it does that. And then I have one jalapeno over here. And she's starting to get some fruit, so there's some coming in there. Not a lot. And then this is Sugar Rush Peach. And Sugar Rush Peach is not the same species as all the rest of these peppers. All the rest of these peppers are Capsicum annum. And I'd have to look it up and put it on the screen. I think this is Bactum. I'm not 100% sure, but it's a different species of pepper. And upright growth, and it takes flipping forever to get ripe. Just maddeningly long to actually get ripe fruit on it. These are yellow when they're unripe, and then they turn kind of a peachy color when they're actually ripe, but they make the best hot sauce, and I made a lot of hot sauce with them last year, and we absolutely loved it, so I wanted a couple of those again this year, even though they take forever. I have the same problem with habaneros, which I've tried to grow every year. Habaneros are also not annum, they're a different species, and they take a very long time to ripen in my climate, and usually so long that I hardly get a harvest. Other little holdouts here, these are all kind of sad right now. I have a shishito. This was a leftover that didn't sell, and it had a lot of damage to the stem, and so I didn't think it was going to survive, but I threw it in the ground, and lo and behold, we're starting to get some new growth down here at the bottom, so maybe it's going to recover. Sometimes you got to roll the dice and see what happens. And then the rest of these, I have 6 additional plants in here, and this is a gochugaru, which is a Korean red pepper. Not a ton of heat, kind of middle, but very, very nice as a dried flaked pepper. And I've kind of fallen in love with this, and I do some different spices with it as well, or mixes with it. And so gochugaru, I have 6 of these. They also turn red when ripe. All peppers turn some other color than what they start as they ripen. There is no green pepper variety. Even with bell peppers, they all turn some color as they ripen. And so again, this is mostly a stress reaction, the fact that these are ripe at this point, because they're not very big yet. And then moving into all of the tomatoes, this is a 30% shade cloth, and I have it up facing the south side all the way down, trying to mitigate some of this heat. It's only a little bit effective, but it's better than nothing. So it doesn't hurt. And this is a 100-foot piece, and I didn't have 100 feet of tomatoes, and so I just ended up wrapping these all the way around this year. So everything on the end here, these are all paste varieties. And you can see that even though the plants look a little bit sad with the heat, I've got a ton of growth. If you go back and look at June and then look at now, I mean, I've got a ton of vegetative growth in here. These guys are really shooting up. So a lot of paste tomatoes. I won't go through all the varieties. If you can go back, I think my May video, or maybe I have a separate video altogether in May that goes through all the varieties that I'm growing this year. This is Japanese trifle. And a friend and I swapped plants, and she gave me one of these because I had tried to grow it last year and didn't have the right seed, wrong seed in the wrong packet. And look at the number of tomatoes on this thing. Holy moly, I don't know what she did. I need to find out what her secrets were to seed starting, because hers is just loaded. There's probably 20 tomatoes on this one plant. And basically it was like that when I was growing it in the greenhouse before I even put it out here. So very, very happy, even though the plant itself is not that tall. So that's kind of exciting. And then most of the rest of this section is big slicers. So things that will ultimately get to be over a pound. But I mean, you can see this is a 4-foot tomato cage. And that tomato is now filling that 4-foot tomato cage. I do not prune my tomatoes. We have a very dry climate, and I want as much leaf cover as I can get so that these tomatoes the actual fruit does not get sunburned. And I don't have disease issues due to humidity, because we just don't really have any humidity. So I don't prune anything. I let these solar panels feed the plant, which is what they're designed to do, and protect the fruit that's in there. Yeah, that's the one I wanted to show you guys. This is, I think that's Dr. Waichi. I'll have to look. And that's actually more yellow than red. It's showing up red on the camera, but it's actually more of a yellow-orange color. But that's fun. There's a huge cat face on the front of that, so a lot of weird cat facing, which is probably why it's turning already. And I did harvest a Paul Robeson out of here the other day, so I'm getting a few. And the fruit that I'm picking is the stuff that actually formed while this was still in the greenhouse. And so the stuff that's happening now is going to be at least a month later. We usually don't get our really big first flush of picking tomatoes until early August. Yeah, everything's just sad with this heat that we've had. This is Brandywine. It's a potato leaf variety of tomato, and so you can see the difference between like this leaf, even though it's hard to tell with all the stuff kind of curling up a little bit, versus this, which is more of the classic tomato type leaf. So certain species of tomatoes have this potato leaf genetics, and I can always spot the Brandywines because it's the only one I plant out here that has that potato leaf style. But these are coming. The Brandywines, the Canner Holes, and the Mortgage Lifters are all just kind of baseball to softball size slicing tomatoes that I mostly slice and dry for sale later. And then the whole rest of this row is cherry tomatoes of one variety or another. And I'm getting a few. I picked a handful. In fact, I caught the dogs this morning. I was out here picking herbs, and I could hear the dogs arguing with each other. And I looked up, and Bodie was like deep inside one of these plants eating tomatoes, a little bugger. So he got yelled at. But I'm getting a few. There's a handful. You can see down in here. There's one. So early days on the cherry tomatoes. I prefer it later in the season when I don't have to bend over in order to pick. I really like to be able to stand up and pick all of my cherry tomatoes. But they're coming. And the first little harvest is always for me. I sell a lot of these through the season. Look at the flower cluster on that. And what's sad about this is there's a ton of flowers, and because of the heat that we've had, the pollen is not going to be viable on these plants. And so we're going to have a gap in our harvest where they did not set fruit, because once the temperature is over about 95 degrees, they simply are not capable of pollinating themselves because it's just too darn hot and that pollen kind of disintegrates. Back in there, you guys can kind of see that. I probably can't get it to focus. There we go. That's a little bit better. This is a black cherry. And then these last two on the end, Santiam Sunrise, these plants have not looked good from the minute they got planted. And so I'm not quite sure why. I'm getting a lot of this, which is really curly leaves. And we put down a lot of composted chicken manure in this row before we planted. And I don't know if they just don't like that extra fertilizer. Maybe it's too strong for them. But I'm not getting a lot of fruit set. You'll see I've got like a cluster here, and that's from when these were in the greenhouse. And I don't think they have set hardly any fruit. Got a little bit, like right here, but not a lot of fruit set. So plants are not super happy. I don't know. We'll see what happens. And then at the end here, we have tomatillos, and these are doing well. I've probably harvested a couple of pounds off of here in the last week or so. So they're starting to come, which is fun. And I've got a lot of volunteers, a lot of volunteer tomatillos popping up all over the garden, which is always the case. So tomatoes, we're losing our light, but always the best part of the summer garden for sure. And then lastly, the one other crop that we've got in the ground, this row is sorghum. And I have multiple videos on sorghum. It is a grain crop. If you get the right variety and you harvest it before it freezes, it's also a syrup crop. And I think it's a great alternative sweetener to have on your homestead. And I'm kind of fascinated by it. You can feed the fodder to large ruminants, you can feed the grain to your chickens, or you can feed the grain to your people. So it's a very versatile crop. Commonly grown in the south, not as commonly grown in the northern parts of the country. But if you get the timing right, you can totally pull it off. It's obviously a grass. It looks a lot like corn. And then right here on the end, these are volunteer tomatillos. This is where I had tomatillos in the garden last year. And I've probably pulled out 50 tomatillos out of this spot. But right here on the end of this row, I've got enough room that I'm just going to let them go. So that's kind of fun. And then we have no light left, but I'm going to do my best to show you a few of the sunflowers because it is always the best part of the garden as we get into July. So these are just starting to bloom. They're full of evening insects right now. But you can see sunflower heads popping up. This camera does a pretty good job of compensating for the almost zero light that we have out here right now. And this isn't even the actual sunflower row. I'm in this area is not getting any water. This area is getting water. So this is our big sunflower row. And it's a little bit behind because I tilled it and replanted everything. So they're just getting ready to open. We're not quite there yet. There's a few open in this row, but not much. But just beautiful. And I will shoot lots of footage of this over the next couple of weeks because by the time we get to August, it won't be at its peak anymore. So look for that as we go. But sunflowers, always fun. And then lots and lots of calendula in here as well. And then of course, way more morning glory than anybody could possibly want. Think twice about growing this beautiful, beautiful plant because it reseeds to the point where it's invasive. You can see I've got it all through here. And I pulled out thousands of plants, but it's so pretty. It's hard to completely illuminate it. And then our sunflowers are starting to pop. And so how lovely is this? They're just starting to go. We've only got a few that are blooming. But very, very pretty. So this is our very hot July garden. Only gonna be hotter for the next week. I heard somebody say the other day that we don't really love summer. We just love the summer that we had when we were in school. And we got the summers off, and so it was something to look forward to, and we got free time and to play with our friends. And the reality is summer kind of sucks. And while I love all of the beautiful summer vegetables, I definitely share that sentiment when it comes to the heat. It is not my favorite time of year. But that's our July garden. Stay tuned, you guys, for more gardening and lots of more cooking with all of this beautiful produce that's gonna come out of these gardens. Thanks for watching. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, subscribe, leave me a comment, and share. I have new content coming out every week.